The morning after my husband's funeral, my daughter-in-law handed me a new will. The house, the money, everything was hers. She gave me 2 weeks to leave the home I'd built for 42 years. My son blocked my number. I simply turned and walked away. Now, 6 months later, she's begging at my door. I hope you're sitting down for this. Follow my story and comment where you're listening from so I can see how far my story has reached. The world lost its color the day my husband, Arthur, died. For 42 years, his laughter had been the soundtrack to my life. His presence, the warmth in every room of our home. When he was gone, all that remained was a crushing, cavernous silence. Our son, Leo, and his wife, Isabella, rushed to my side. Leo's hug felt stiff, his grief distant, but I chalked it up to the shock of losing his father. Isabella was a whirlwind of efficiency, her condolences delivered in a perfectly modulated tone. She and Leo took care of all the funeral arrangements, insisting I shouldn't have to worry about a thing. I was so lost in my own sea of sorrow that I mistook their control for compassion, their haste for a desire to spare me further pain. I was a fool. The morning after we laid Arthur to rest, I sat in his favorite armchair, clutching a cold cup of tea, trying to remember how to breathe. The doorbell rang, a jarring sound in the heavy silence. It was Isabella, but she wasn't alone. 2 men in dark, severe suits stood behind her like stone sentinels. A sickly, sweet smile was plastered on her face, a smile that didn't reach her cold, assessing eyes. "Eleanor," she cooed, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I know this is a terrible time, but we need to discuss Arthur's estate." She led the lawyers into the living room, the room where Arthur and I had celebrated decades of birthdays, where we'd watched Leo take his first steps. One of the men placed a sheaf of papers on the coffee table. It was a will. But it wasn't the will Arthur and I had drafted together years ago, the one that left everything to Leo with the understanding that I would be cared for in this house for the rest of my days. This document was dated just 2 months before Arthur's death. My hands trembled as I read the first page. The legalese was dense, but the meaning was brutally clear. Everything, the house, the savings, Arthur's pension, every single asset was bequeathed directly and solely to Isabella. A strangled gasp escaped my lips. "This is impossible," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "This is a mistake, a forgery. Arthur would never do this. Leo is our son, not Isabella. This house belongs to our family." Isabella's sweet facade crumbled away, revealing the granite beneath. "It's no mistake, Eleanor," she said, her voice now flat and hard. "Arthur and Leo had a long talk. They agreed you were getting too old to manage everything, that you were becoming a burden. Arthur signed it himself. He knew this was for the best." Every word was a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. A burden. The lie was so monstrous, so utterly alien to the man I had loved, that I couldn't even process it. I looked past her, searching for some sign of reason in the lawyers' blank faces, but they refused to meet my gaze. Isabella wasn't finished. "You have 2 weeks, she announced, as if discussing the weather. 2 weeks to pack your personal belongings and vacate the premises. We need to get the house on the market as soon as possible. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to dismantle a lifetime. To pack 42 years of memories into boxes and walk away." My mind reeled. I needed to talk to Leo. He would clear this up. This was all Isabella's doing. My son would never betray me like this. As soon as they left, I scrambled for my phone, my fingers fumbling as I dialed his number. It rang once, then went straight to a cold, automated voice. "The number you have called is not accepting calls at this time." I tried again, and again. The same message. The truth slammed into me with the force of a physical impact. He had blocked me. My own son had blocked my number. I didn't get 2 weeks. The very next morning, my doorbell rang again. It was Isabella, alone this time. She was wearing my favorite blue silk dress, the one Arthur had bought me for our 40th anniversary. It hung on her frame like a trophy, a grotesque parody of my life. "Time's up, Eleanor," she said, her eye glinting with triumph. "I've decided to speed things up." I stood there, hollowed out by grief and betrayal, and looked at the woman wearing my dress, standing on my doorstep, evicting me from my life. A single question surfaced through the fog of my despair. Why? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why are you doing this? Her mask of civility was gone completely. A flicker of pure, unadulterated hatred crossed her face. Because you existed, she hissed, the words laced with a venom that chilled me to the bone. You took up space, and now you don't. She had a moving truck already waiting at the curb. I was allowed one small suitcase. An hour later, I was standing on the sidewalk, watching the door to my home, my life, click shut. I was utterly alone. The first few nights I slept in my car until the gas ran out. Then came the true humiliation, the days of gnawing hunger that drove me to search for scraps behind restaurants. But the hunger wasn't the worst part. The cold wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the silence. It was the chilling, absolute certainty that to the two people who were once the center of my world, I had simply ceased to exist. I had been erased. 3 weeks after being cast out, I was a ghost haunting the back alleys of the city I once called home. My world had shrunk to the grimy confines of dumpsters and the cold concrete of bus station benches. Hunger was a constant, gnawing companion. I was rummaging behind a fancy Italian restaurant, my fingers stiff with cold, as I sorted through a bag of discarded bread, when a shadow fell over me. I flinched, expecting to be chased away, but the voice that spoke was calm and clear, a stark contrast to the grit of my surroundings. "Excuse me, are you Eleanor Morrison?" I looked up, squinting into the afternoon light. A woman stood there, her clothes so clean and pressed they seemed to belong to another dimension. She wore a charcoal gray suit, her hair was pulled back in an elegant twist, and she carried a sleek leather briefcase. Her expression was not one of pity or disgust, but of professional focus. I slowly straightened up, my pride a tattered remnant of a former life. I could only manage a hoarse nod. "My name is Helen Carter," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm an attorney from New York. I've been searching for you for several days, Mrs. Morrison." My mind couldn't make sense of her words. An attorney? From New York? Looking for me? She must have mistaken me for someone else. But then she asked a question that sent a jolt through my numb existence. "I was retained by your brother, Victor Vance. Do you know where I might find him?" Victor, the name was like a key turning in a rusted lock, opening a part of my memory I had sealed shut 30 years ago. My older brother, my only sibling. A bitter argument over our parents' will had fractured our relationship beyond repair. We hadn't spoken a single word since. He had walked out of my life, and I had let him go. "I haven't spoken to Victor in 30 years, I said, my voice raspy. "I have no idea where he is." Helen Carter's professional demeanor softened with a flicker of genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, Eleanor," she said softly. "Victor passed away 2 months ago. It was a sudden heart attack." The news didn't bring tears. It brought a strange, hollow ache, the finality of it, the unresolved anger, the lost years, all of it now permanently sealed in silence. He was gone. The brother I once adored, then despised, was simply gone. I braced myself against the cold brick wall, feeling dizzy. Helen took a step closer. "Eleanor, this is why I had to find you. Victor changed his will shortly before he died." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "He left you everything. His entire estate, his properties, his investments, everything." I stared at her, certain I was hallucinating from hunger. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "That's not possible," I stammered, shaking my head in disbelief. "You don't understand. Victor hated me. The last words he ever said to me were that he wished I had never been born. He wouldn't leave me a penny, let alone his entire estate. He was very specific," Helen insisted gently, "and he left this for you." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. My name, Eleanor, was scrawled across the front in a familiar, almost illegible handwriting. My brother's terrible handwriting. My hands shook so badly I could barely take it from her. I tore it open. The letter inside was short, the words stark against the page. "Eleanor," and it began, "if you are reading this, it means my time ran out before I could say it to your face. I know everything. I know about Arthur's passing, and I am sorry for your loss. I also know what your son and his wife have done to you. I know they threw you out, that you have nothing. I've had someone keeping an eye on you for a while now. I gasped, my eyes scanning the lines again and again. He knew. Somehow, from a distance of 3 decades and hundreds of miles, he knew. The letter continued. I was a stubborn old fool, Eleanor. Pride is a poison. I was wrong 30 years ago, and I let that pride steal our family from us. I have no wife, no children, just a business. For 3 decades, I did nothing but work, and I spent that time building an empire worth $47 million. It meant nothing without family to share it with. I can't take back the lost years, but I can give you this. Everything is yours now. I was sobbing, great silent tears carving paths through the grime on my face. $47 million. The number was meaningless, an abstraction. It was the other words that shattered me. I was wrong. The apology I never thought I'd hear. He had left one condition. You must live in my main residence, my penthouse on Fifth Avenue, for 1 full year. After that, you can do whatever you wish. His final words were scrawled at the bottom of the page, as if added as an afterthought, but they held the weight of a lifetime. I'm sorry, Eleanor, for everything. Your brother, Victor. In that cold, forgotten alley, holding a letter from a ghost, the world cracked open and a sliver of light, a glimmer of hope, finally broke through the darkness. The journey from the alley to Fifth Avenue felt like a dream. Helen Carter drove me herself, handling my transition from a nameless street dweller to a woman of immense wealth with quiet professionalism. The penthouse was breathtaking, a palace in the sky with windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a panoramic view of Central Park. The sheer scale of it was dizzying. Marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting, and the air was still and clean, a world away from the stench of the dumpster I'd called my pantry just hours before. My brother had thought of everything. In the master bedroom, a walk-in closet was filled with new clothes, all in my exact size. Soft cashmere sweaters, tailored trousers, elegant dresses. It was as if he had been preparing for my arrival, a silent act of care that spoke volumes more than words. Helen gave me a tour, explaining the various legal and financial matters I would now be responsible for. But my mind was elsewhere. I was drawn to his study, a room paneled in dark, rich mahogany and lined with books from floor to ceiling. It smelled of leather and old paper, a scent I instantly associated with my brother, even after 30 years. On the massive, polished desk, amidst neat stacks of papers, sat a single silver-framed photograph. It was of Victor and me as children, grinning gap-toothed at the camera on a summer day, our arms slung around each other's shoulders. The frame was worn at the edges, proof that he had picked it up, had looked at it every single day. The thought that he had kept me close in this small way, even through decades of bitter silence, brought a fresh wave of tears. After Helen left, promising to return the next day, I was left alone in the cavernous silence of the penthouse. The luxury felt sterile, alien. I felt like an imposter, a ghost haunting a life that wasn't mine. I wandered aimlessly from room to room before finding myself back in the study, drawn to the desk, to the picture of 2 children who had no idea what betrayals and heartaches lay ahead. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood of the desk, my touch tracing its lines and curves. As my hands slid along the side, my fingers brushed against a small, almost invisible indentation. Curious, I pressed it. A section of the front panel clicked softly and sprang open, revealing a hidden compartment. My breath caught in my throat. Inside lay a single thick manila file. The label on the tab, typed in stark black letters, made my heart begin to hammer against my ribs. It read, Isabella Morrison Investigation Report. With trembling hands, I lifted the file from its hiding place. It was heavy, filled with documents, photographs, and clippings. I sat down in Victor's large leather chair and opened it. The first page was a summary. Isabella's real name wasn't Isabella. It was something else entirely, one of several aliases she had used over the past decade. The report, compiled by a private investigator, was a chilling chronicle of deceit and manipulation. It detailed 2 previous marriages to wealthy older men. Both had ended disastrously for the husbands. The first had been left financially ruined, his business mysteriously collapsing before he filed for bankruptcy. The second husband hadn't been so lucky. He had died from a sudden, unexplained heart condition, leaving everything to his grieving young widow. The police had found no evidence of foul play, but the investigators' notes painted a deeply suspicious picture. One sentence in the summary leaped off the page, chilling me to the core. Subject appears to be following established pattern with current husband Leo Morrison and his family assets. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about greed, this was predatory. Isabella was a professional, a black widow who had snared my son in her web. I flipped through the pages, my horror mounting with each new revelation. Tucked into a pocket at the back of the file, I found a notarized document. My hands shook as I realized what it was. It was a copy of Arthur's original will, the one we had created together years ago, the one that provided for me, that left our home and our savings in my care, before passing to Leo upon my death. It was exactly as I remembered. Beneath it was a smaller piece of paper, a handwritten note from Victor. His scrawl was rushed, angry. Eleanor, I found this in Arthur's files after he passed. The will Isabella showed you is a fake. A very good one, but a fake. She must have gotten a sample of his signature and had it professionally forged. The notary is likely fake or paid off. My mind reeled. The betrayal was deeper, darker than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just my son who had been manipulated. Arthur had been a victim as well. Victor's note ended with a confession that twisted a knife in my already broken heart. I tried to warn him, Eleanor. I called Arthur a few months ago, tried to tell him what this woman was, but she had already gotten to him. She had filled his head with lies about me, resurrected our old fight. He told me I was a bitter, jealous old man and hung up. It was the last time I ever spoke to him. My brother had tried to protect us. He had reached across 30 years of silence to save my husband, to save me, and had been turned away. And Isabella, the architect of all this pain, had not only stolen my home and my future, but she had also stolen my husband's final months, poisoning his mind and isolating him in a web of her own making. The grief I felt was now mingled with a cold, rising fury. The file was a map of Isabella's evil, but I had a chilling premonition that I had not yet reached the destination. My instincts screamed that my meticulous brother, the man who built a corporate empire from nothing, would not have stopped at just a background check and a copy of a will. I reached back into the dark, hollow space of the hidden compartment, my fingers searching the felt lining. They brushed against another stack of papers, thinner this time, bound with a rubber band. They were bank records. Statement after statement detailed large, systematic transfers from Arthur's personal investment accounts to an offshore account under a name I recognized from the investigator's report, one of Isabella's aliases. She hadn't just waited for him to die. She had been bleeding him dry for months, siphoning away the nest egg he had so carefully built for our future. Beneath the bank statements was something else, a tiny metallic object, no bigger than a pen, cool to the touch. Taped to it was a small, folded piece of paper. I recognized Victor's handwriting immediately. The note contained only 6 words: audio from Leo and Isabella's kitchen. My blood turned to ice in my veins, a recording device. He had managed to get a bug into their house, into the very heart of their conspiracy. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my hand frozen in midair. Part of me, the part that still clung to the memory of the little boy I had raised, didn't want to know. It wanted to believe Leo was a victim, a fool manipulated by a master. But the other part, the part that had slept in a car and eaten from a dumpster, needed to hear the truth, no matter how unspeakable. With a trembling finger, I found the small button on the side and pressed play. A faint hiss filled the silence of the study, followed by the clinking of glasses. Then a voice emerged, sharp and clear and utterly devoid of the syrupy sweetness she had always used with me. It was Isabella. "I still can't believe how easy it was," she said, a smug satisfaction lacing her tone. "The old man never suspected a thing. Signed the new will without even reading the fine print, just like you said he would." My stomach clenched. I waited, holding my breath, praying I wouldn't hear his response. But then it came. It wasn't a voice of regret or reluctance. It was a laugh, a short, sharp bark of amusement. It was my son, Leo. "You're brilliant, baby," he said, his voice thick with adoration for the woman who had orchestrated my ruin. "Absolutely brilliant. Getting his mother out of the picture was the best thing we ever did. No more of her constant hovering, her sad little sighs. We can finally live. A wave of nausea washed over me. I gripped the arms of the leather chair, anchoring myself as the world tilted on its axis. It wasn't a manipulation. It was a partnership. He wasn't her victim. He was her co-conspirator. The recording continued, their voices weaving a tapestry of such profound cruelty it was almost surreal. They discussed selling the house, my home, and what they would do with the money. Then the conversation took an even darker turn. "What if she tries to make trouble?" Leo asked, a note of anxiety creeping into his voice. "What if she tries to contest the wall?" Isabella scoffed, a sound of pure derision. "With what? She has nothing." "But you're right, we should have a contingency plan." I could hear her moving around the kitchen, the sound of a cupboard opening and closing. "I've already spoken to a lawyer friend. If she so much as squeaks, we start proceedings to have her declared mentally incompetent. We'll say her grief over Arthur has unhinged her, a few doctors on the payroll, a sympathetic judge. They'll lock her away in a nice, quiet facility where she can't bother anyone ever again." "Lock me away." The words echoed in the silent room. They wanted to erase me completely, to bury me alive. Isabella delivered the final, fatal blow, her voice dripping with scornful confidence. "Honestly, Leo, who is going to help her? She has no real friends, just a few old biddies from her garden club. She has no family except for that crazy, estranged brother of hers up in New York. And everyone knows he hates her guts. She is utterly and completely alone." And in that moment, the profound, soul-crushing sadness I had carried for weeks didn't just vanish. It transmuted. It was superheated by the sheer venom of their words, compressed by the weight of their betrayal, and it crystallized into something hard, sharp, and diamond-strong. It turned into pure rage. They thought I was alone. They thought I was weak. They thought I was powerless. They had miscalculated. They had grievously underestimated the bond of blood, however strained, and the meticulous fury of a wronged brother. I looked at the silver-framed photo on the desk, at the two smiling children. My brother hadn't just left me his fortune. He had spent his final months gathering the weapons I would need for the war he knew was coming. He had given me the truth. I was no longer Eleanor Morrison, Arthur's grieving widow and Leo's discarded mother. That woman was gone, left behind in a back alley. I was Victor Vance's sister, and the sole inheritor of his fortune, his secrets, and his cold, calculating patience. And they had no idea what was about to hit them. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The truth I found was darker than anything I could have imagined. What I'm about to share with you will change everything. Make sure you like and share this story so it can't be silenced, because you won't want to miss a single second of what happens next. I didn't sleep. I spent the night in Victor's leather chair, the cold fury of fire in my belly, the damning recording playing on a loop in my head. When Helen Carter arrived the next morning, I was holding a cup of black coffee, staring at the sunrise over Central Park without really seeing it. The open compartment and the files spread across the desk told her everything. She didn't look surprised, only a deep sadness in her eyes. "You found the files," she said. It wasn't a question. "Victor wanted you to have them, but he hoped you'd have a few days to settle in first. He knew how devastating it would be." She sat down opposite me, her professional demeanor a comforting anchor in my swirling storm of rage and grief. "Victor didn't do this alone," she explained, gesturing to the investigation report. "He hired the best. A man named Frank Miller, a former FBI agent, who now runs a very discreet private investigation firm. Frank and his team were watching them for months. Victor suspected Isabella was after Arthur's money, but he never imagined how far she would go." Helen's voice grew grave. "Frank's team gathered over 40 hours of audio. It was all legally obtained, recorded with a long-range directional microphone from an adjacent property. Everything is admissible." She looked at the small recording device on the desk. "That," she said, "is not the only recording. Eleanor, there's another one that Victor instructed me to play for you only if you decided you wanted to pursue this." My hand tightened around my coffee cup. "Play it." Helen retrieved a laptop from her briefcase, and with a few clicks, a new audio file began to play. This recording was different. The sound quality was slightly more muffled, as if filtered through glass. It was dated 2 weeks before Arthur died. I heard Leo's voice first, thin and strained, with a nervousness that twisted my insides into a knot. "Are you sure the medication switch will work?" The pharmacist said his new prescription was very specific. "What if something goes wrong?" Then came Isabella's voice, smooth as silk and deadly as a viper's kiss. It was the voice of a predator calming its nervous mate. "Baby, trust me, I've done my research. A small, crushed dose of digitalis in his morning tea every other day. It will build up in his system slowly. It's almost untraceable after a few days. The digitalis will interact with his new heart medication and trigger a severe arrhythmia. To any doctor, it'll look like a natural, tragic heart attack. No one will ever suspect a thing." The world stopped. The coffee cup slipped from my numb fingers, shattering on the marble floor and splashing dark liquid across the pristine surface. But I barely registered the sound. My mind was consumed by a single word: digitalis. A heart medication, yes, but in the wrong dose. A poison. A poison that mimics the symptoms of heart failure. Arthur hadn't died from a broken heart. He hadn't faded away from his illness. He had been murdered, systematically, patiently, and cruelly poisoned in his own home. They had murdered my husband while I sat in the next room, grieving a future I didn't know had already been stolen from me. The horrible truth crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. Isabella wasn't just a con artist. The other husbands, the financial ruin, the suspicious death. She was a serial killer. A black widow who married, manipulated, and murdered for profit. And my son, my Leo, the baby I had nursed, and the boy I had raised, was her willing accomplice. He hadn't just stood by, he had been a part of it. His nervous question wasn't one of conscience, but of a criminal worried about getting caught. Helen stopped the recording, and the silence that followed was heavier and more profound than any I had ever known. She looked at me, her face a mask of compassion and resolve. The autopsy report was inconclusive, listing cardiac arrest as the cause of death, she said quietly. Frank believes she has done this at least once before, without a confession or a new toxicology screen, which would require an exhumation and a court order. This recording is our strongest piece of evidence, but it may not be enough to convict her of murder. Isabella is smart. For a long moment, I said nothing. I stared at the shattered pieces of the coffee cup on the floor, seeing in them the wreckage of my life, my family, my entire world. The grief was a tidal wave, but the rage was a volcano beneath it, building pressure, preparing to erupt. I slowly stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly steady, and walked to the vast window overlooking the city. Millions of people down there, living their lives completely unaware of the monstrous evil I had just confronted. Helen's voice came from behind me, soft but clear. "Victor left very specific instructions. The resources of his entire estate are at your disposal. So, Eleanor, what do you want to do?" I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes fixed on the horizon. The weak, grieving woman who had been thrown out on the street was gone forever. In her place was someone else, someone forged in the fires of betrayal and loss. "I want justice," I said, my voice low and firm, utterly devoid of the tremble that had plagued it for weeks. Not just for me, for Arthur, and for any other men she may have hurt. "It won't be easy," Helen cautioned. "As I said, she's smart. She's covered her tracks well. She'll have the best lawyers money can buy, the money she stole from your husband." I finally turned to face her, a cold, clear purpose solidifying in my heart. I knew what Victor would have done. He wouldn't have relied on a single piece of evidence. He would have set a trap. "Her arrogance is her weakness," I said, the plan already beginning to form in my mind. "She thinks I'm a helpless old woman. She thinks she's untouchable." I looked Helen straight in the eye. "A legal battle could take years, and she could slip through our fingers. Then we need to make her confess." The next 48 hours were a blur of intense, meticulous planning. Helen brought Frank Miller to the penthouse. He was a man who seemed to have been carved from granite, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He listened intently as Helen and I laid out the facts, his face an unreadable mask. When we finished, he didn't offer condolences. He offered a strategy. Isabella's a classic sociopath, he said, his voice a low, gravelly hum. Her ego is her Achilles' heel. Right now, she thinks she's won. She sees you as a non-entity, a problem that has been solved. The key to flushing her out is making her feel secure. She needs to believe you're still the broken, helpless woman she threw out on the street. Together, the three of us devised a plan. It was audacious, risky, and depended entirely on my ability to play a role that went against every fiber of my being. The strategy was simple in its premise, but complex in its execution. We would let them discover the inheritance. Not all of it, just enough. We would create a narrative that I had inherited a fortune from my estranged brother, but that I was too frail and grief-stricken to manage it. Most importantly, we needed them to believe that, as my only child, Leo was my sole heir. The $47 million would become a lure, a prize so irresistible that Isabella's greed would overpower her caution. Frank's logic was chillingly clear. If she killed for your husband's estate, he said, his gaze steady on mine, what do you think she'll do for $47 million? My role was the most difficult. I had to make the hardest phone call of my life. Frank had me rehearse it over and over, coaching me on tone, on the precise quaver of desperation that needed to be in my voice. He made me remember the cold, the hunger, the utter despair of those first few weeks. I had to channel that broken woman, to become her again for one last time. From a new, untraceable burner phone, I dialed the number that had once been my lifeline, the number of my son. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. It rang 3 times before he answered, his voice impatient and clipped. Hello? I took a deep, shaky breath. Leo, I whispered, pitching my voice to sound weak and reedy, the voice of a confused old woman. Leo, it's me. It's Mom. There was a long, cold silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Isabella's muffled voice in the background, asking who it was. Then Leo spoke again, his tone sharp with suspicion. How did you get this number? A nice lady at the shelter helped me, I lied, letting a sob catch in my throat. Leo, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for being such a burden on you and Isabella. I was so lost after your father. I wasn't thinking straight. I followed Frank's script precisely, playing the part of a lonely, repentant mother who had nowhere else to turn. I could feel him hesitating, the gears turning in his head. I knew I had to set the hook. Leo, I need to see you, I pleaded. Something has happened. I found out some things about my family that I never knew, about Uncle Victor. I let the name hang in the air. Things that it might affect you too. It's important. Another pause. This one was charged with a new energy. I could practically hear Isabella whispering instructions in his ear. Greed was a powerful motivator. Where are you? He finally asked, his voice suddenly stripped of its earlier hostility and replaced with a cautious, feigned concern. I'm in New York, I said. Victor, he left me a place to stay. I gave him the address to the penthouse, careful not to reveal its grandeur. I made it sound like a small, inherited apartment. Please, Leo, I need my son. He took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. We'll be there this weekend, Mom, he said, the false warmth in his voice making my skin crawl. Don't you worry. We'll figure this all out. As soon as I hung up, the facade crumbled. I sank into a chair, shaking. Frank gave me a grim, approving nod. The trap is set, he said. Now we prepare the cage. For the next 2 days, the penthouse was transformed. Frank's team, a quiet and efficient group of men and women, descended upon the apartment. They were ghosts, moving silently as they wired the entire residence with state-of-the-art hidden cameras and microphones. They were placed in lamps, in books, behind paintings, in every conceivable location, all feeding to a command center Frank was setting up in an adjacent apartment he had rented. We staged the penthouse with painstaking care. Victor's priceless art was replaced with generic prints. The luxurious furniture was covered with drab-looking throws. We packed away the designer clothes and left only a few simple, worn-looking outfits in the closet. The goal was to make it look as if I were a poor relation, a guest staying in a rich man's home, overwhelmed and out of my depth. I was not the master of this castle. I was just a temporary and perhaps easily removable occupant. The stage was set, the players were on their way, and I was about to give the most important and most dangerous performance of my life. The doorbell chimed at precisely 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. I took a final steadying breath, smoothed the front of the plain gray cardigan Frank had chosen for me, and walked to the door. When I opened it, the sight of them sent a jolt of ice and fire through my veins. Leo looked uncomfortable, a flicker of something that might have been guilt in his eyes, before it was quickly suppressed. Isabella, however, was a master of her craft. Her face was a perfect mask of gentle concern, though I could see her eyes darting past me, taking in the scale of the penthouse entrance. The greed was a palpable thing, a hungry glint in her gaze as they stepped inside. Even with our careful staging, the sheer size of the space and the view from the windows screamed of wealth. "Mom, no," Leo said, his voice hesitant. He made a move as if to hug me, but I stepped back, playing the part of a fragile, timid woman. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice soft and trembling, just as I had rehearsed. I didn't know who else to call. I led them into the living room where I had a pot of tea and some simple cookies set out on the coffee table. Every movement was calculated to project weakness and confusion. I shuffled my feet, I wrung my hands, I avoided direct eye contact. I was the very picture of a grieving widow, lost and overwhelmed. Isabella surveyed the room, her gaze lingering on the few remaining expensive pieces we had strategically left out. "This is quite a place, Eleanor," she said, her voice laced with a carefully measured mix of awe and sympathy. "Your brother must have done very well for himself." "I suppose so," I said, looking down at my hands. "I don't really understand any of it. The lawyers, they just keep talking and using all these big words. It's all so confusing." I poured the tea with a deliberately shaky hand, letting some of it slosh into the saucer. "They said Victor left me everything. This apartment, some other things." I let my voice trail off as if the concept was too large for my simple mind to grasp. Then I dangled the bait. I looked up at them, my eyes wide with manufactured bewilderment. They kept mentioning a number, a very large number. They said something about $47 million, but that can't be right, can it? It must be a mistake. The change in the room's atmosphere was instantaneous and profound. It was as if a switch had been flipped. Leo's discomfort vanished, replaced by a wide-eyed, ravenous excitement. But Isabella's transformation was the most chilling. Her face, which had been a mask of polite concern, morphed into an expression of the most intense, loving adoration I had ever seen her display. It was the look of a predator that has just spotted a fatally wounded prize. She rushed to the sofa and sat beside me, taking my hand in both of hers. Her touch felt like a spider crawling on my skin, but I didn't flinch. "Eleanor, darling, that's wonderful news," she cooed, her voice dripping with syrupy sweetness. "Oh, you deserve this. After everything you've been through, and you don't have to worry about a thing. Leo and I were here to help you." Leo moved to my other side, putting a heavy arm around my shoulder. It took every ounce of my self-control not to recoil. "She's right, Mom," he said, his voice thick with false sincerity. "We're family. We'll take care of everything for your Chiyurmaryu. You shouldn't have to stress about lawyers and finances at a time like this." They spent the next hour laying the groundwork for their next move. They feigned deep concern, asking careful questions about the will. When I mentioned the 1-year residency requirement, I saw a flicker of annoyance in Isabella's eyes, quickly masked. A year was a long time to wait. They offered to look over the paperwork for me, to hire a financial advisor they trusted, to manage the money on my behalf so I wouldn't have to be bothered. The entire conversation was a masterclass in manipulation, and all of it was being captured by Frank's hidden cameras. The final sickening flourish came from Isabella. She squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with fake tears. "And of course, Eleanor, after the year is up and you can leave this place, you'll come and live with us. You'll move back home. We'll take care of you. You'll never have to be alone again." The audacity of it was breathtaking. She was offering me a room in the house she had stolen from me. the house where she had murdered my husband. I looked up at her, tears welling in my own eyes, though mine were born of a cold, hard rage. I let her see only gratitude. "Oh, Isabella," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "Thank you. I would like that very much." They left that evening, walking out the door with triumphant smiles on their faces. I watched them go from the window, two predators leaving the den of what they believed to be their helpless prey. From their perspective, the day had been a resounding success. They were completely convinced that I was the same naive, broken woman they had thrown to the curb just a few weeks ago. They believed they were one small, final step away from getting their hands on $47 million. They had no idea that they had just walked into a steel trap and that the door had just slammed shut behind them. It took 3 weeks, 3 long weeks of playing the part of the frail, confused woman, taking their calls, listening to their cloying words of concern, all while Frank and the FBI gathered the final threads of their case. They arrived on a Friday evening, just as the sun was setting. Isabella was radiant, carrying an expensive bottle of wine. Leo stood behind her, a strained smile on his face. "We brought your favorite Chardonnay, Mom," he said, "to celebrate your good fortune." From the command center next door, Frank's team had already analyzed a previous conversation where Isabella detailed her plan to Leo, a toast with wine laced with a massive, fatal dose of digitalis. As they stepped into the penthouse, Frank and 2 FBI agents stepped out from the hallway, their movements calm and swift. The bottle of wine slipped from Isabella's grasp, shattering on the floor. Her mask of loving concern dissolved into a snarl of pure hatred. Leo simply crumpled, his face ashen with terror. The trap was sprung. The evidence was irrefutable. Frank's team had recordings of them planning Arthur's murder, my murder, and discussing Isabella's previous crimes in detail. The trial was a spectacle. Isabella, ever the performer, tried to charm the jury, portraying herself as a loving wife misled by a troubled family. But the audio recordings stripped away her lies one by one. The moment that will forever be seared into my memory came during my testimony. After the prosecution finished, Isabella, against her lawyer's frantic advice, chose to address me directly. Her eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking with practiced despair. "Eleanor," she pleaded, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom, "please, don't let them do this. Don't let them destroy your own family." For a moment, all the air left the room, and then a strength I never knew I possessed rose up from the depths of my soul. I stood, turning to face her in the witness box, and for the first time, I looked directly into the empty abyss of her eyes. My voice was not the weak whisper she expected. It was clear, strong, and it did not waver. "My family," I said, my words sharp and precise, "was destroyed the day you and my son conspired to murder my husband for his money. My family was destroyed when you threw me out of my home to die on the streets." "And Leo," I said, turning my gaze to my son, who sat weeping at the defendant's table, "stop being my son the moment he chose to help you do it. You are not my family. You are monsters." The verdict was swift. Leo, for his role in the conspiracies, received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Isabella, linked by Frank's investigation to a total of 4 other deaths over 15 years, was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to death. Justice was served, but it brought no joy, only a quiet, somber closure. I sold my old home, the one Arthur and I had built together. I couldn't bear to step inside it again, but I found solace in selling it to a young, happy family who I knew would fill its rooms with laughter instead of ghosts. With the proceeds from the sale and the vast resources my brother had left me, I began a new life. I established the Arthur Morrison Foundation, a nonprofit organization with a single clear mission: to provide legal aid and safe housing for elderly individuals who have become victims of financial abuse and abandonment by their own families. I turned my pain into a purpose. 2 years later, I was sitting on the porch of my new home, a small, lovely house by a lake hundreds of miles from my old life. A woman named Dorothy, one of the first people my foundation had helped, had come to visit. Her story was heartbreakingly similar to mine: a son who had drained her accounts and sold her home from under her. "I feel so foolish," she whispered, tears in her eyes. How could I not have seen what he was doing? I reached out and took her hand. Because you loved him, I said, the words coming from a place of deep, hard-won understanding. You saw the little boy you raised, not the man he had become. That's not foolish, Dorothy. That's human. As she left, I stayed on the porch watching the light dance on the water. At 70 years old, after a life of love, betrayal, and rebirth, I felt a deep, unshakable peace. The rage was gone, replaced by a quiet strength. I poured myself a glass of iced tea, the evening air warm and gentle. I raised my glass in a silent, solitary toast, not to the past, but to the future. Thank you, Victor, I whispered to the empty air, knowing somehow he could hear me. Thank you for giving me the chance to fight back.